What if the clothes are wet afterwards, but too wet, kind of soaking wet rather than a little bit damp? Is that a common issue?
A lot of people right away they go to a drain pump, but again, with as much as a washer fills up, if it was able to drain enough water to where your clothes are just damp, ironically enough, it may not be the drain pump. So what I see in the field, with especially with top load washers, is it's going to be the cold water valve. And again, that's not the first thing you think about if your clothes are wet at the end of a cycle.
Hmm.
But again, if that cold supply is clogged, it won't do its final rinse and spin. So it'll pretty much just drain the water out and leave your clothes wet. So if you find that, the first thing that I would check is I would turn the washer on and do a rinse only cycle. So you're only using the cold water, and then see if your water's coming in super slow. If so, then try to clean out the filter and stuff in the back of the water valve. The other thing that could cause the clothes to not come out fully spun, I would say coming in second place would be the suspension rods. If it's
Okay.
so out of balance that it's not able to get into a final spin,
Right,
it'll
yeah.
just kind of give up and stop. Then I would say coming in third place would be most top load washers have a speed sensor, and most of those speed sensor are incorporated into basically what is the clutch. So that's what shifts from an agitate to a spin. It's a mechanism, it's motorized, and it literally kind of swings a little arm over, and it'll activate either wash or spin. So when the motor turns, it'll do that function. So the speed sensor, if that gets bad, the washer's not able to determine how fast it's actually going. So instead of just winging it and possibly damaging the washer,
Mm.
it'll just stop and it won't fully spin. Most washing machines that is easily accessible and easily replaceable, you would lean it against the wall just like you would if you were looking at the drain pump. You would want to go in your service manual and find out where it is, but it's typically has anywhere from like a 4 to an 8 pin connector, and that's really the only thing on the bottom of your washer that's going to have that many pins. And there's really not a way to check it. Again, that's one of those you would change based on the symptom. So if I was there and the water valve checks good, the suspension rod checks good, I would just order that part. That is typically between, I would say 50 to 110 or so, depending. But again, it's literally one connector and two Phillips head screws to change. It's super easy.
And are those quite common between brands and models in terms
Yeah,
of?
yeah. So all top loads are going to have a speed sensor and one sensor or another. The front load, they're kind of interesting how they work. Some of them do have a speed sensor, and a front load it's typically called a hall sensor for some reason. Don't know why,
Mhm.
but that helps to not only determine the speed but also if the unit is balanced as it's spinning. So in a front load, if you find that your clothes are still wet, that sensor could be bad, and that gets a little more complicated. Some of them have the sensor, some of them don't. On the front loads, if they don't have the sensor, the speed and balance sensing is incorporated into the stator or the motor assembly. That may need kind of a whole section in its own on that part of it. But it is definitely less common in a front load and a lot more common in a top load that you have that symptom.
Gotcha. Right. Just to recap, if your clothes are sort of coming out soaking wet, we're looking
Mhm.
at potentially the water valve with buildup on the filter, suspension, which you can see if it's sort of jiggling too much or if you do the
Mhm.
sort of test. Yeah, the speed sensor, which it sounds like if you can see one that definitely goes with your model, that's safe to order and try it. And if it looks complicated, then maybe call in some help.
Right, right. And what's funny about the speed sensor too, you'll find between brands, they kind of have the same thing, but they all call it something different.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the speed sensor it can be called a speed sensor, a clutch, or a oh, there's another one I'm forgetting. If I think of it, I'll mention it. But
Yeah. No
yeah,
worries.
that
We'll put it in.
yeah, for like the average consumer that doesn't ever work on stuff like that, that's another thing that can be very confusing because they
Yeah.
may say, okay, well here it says it's this, and here's the part number, but then I take this part number, I put it on Amazon, and they're calling it this, and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Just one of those things where every brand wants their own sort of thing.
Mhm.